Professor Khalid Najil As-Samari, the chief guest who is here with us. We are honored to have you here, sir. Professor Shafiq Ahmad Khan, the guest of honor. Professor Kafil Ahmad Qasmi, sir, the Dean Faculty of Arts. Professor Alvi, Chairman Department of Arabic and the convener of the seminar. Professor Sanaullah, in fact, Alvi Sahib is the Chairman of the department. Sanaullah, convener of this seminar. Our distinguished guests, I could see a galaxy of them. Professor Bari, Professor Imtiyaz Zilli, Dr. Abid Raza Bedar, Professor Durrani, and a galaxy of them are here. Our distinguished guests who have come from outside, our colleagues and dear students. I'm indeed honored and privileged to be here with you. Thank you, sir. It's a great honor for me to deliver this keynote address before such an august gathering. And I'll do my best as a person representing the Department of Linguistics, because the seminar has a main title which suggests that the contribution of India to language sciences. Any discourse on the contribution of India to language sciences inevitably brings a binarity of non-West versus West and anticipates looking into non-Western grammatical tradition to the study of language sciences. Also, the seminar is organized by the Department of Arabic, and it is in the Department of Arabic, not in the Faculty of Arts. Therefore, the non-Western grammatical tradition assumes an hyponymous status under which both the Indian and the Arabic grammatical traditions are subsumed. Both these traditions are like a proverbial story of a Chinese emperor who once ordered a tunnel to be bored through a great mountain. The engineers decided that the best and quickest way to do it would be to begin work on both sides of the mountain after precise measurements. The two tunnels would meet in the middle, making a single one. If they do not meet, there will be two tunnels instead of one. I would view grammatical traditions of the non-Western philosophers and scholars of language from both India and Arab as tunnelers through a mountain, working at opposite sides of the same mountain with different tools without even knowing if they are working in each other's direction. But both were doing their jobs with new ideas, digging as profoundly as possible with an equal commitment. I must congratulate the organizers of the national seminar for selecting this topic and carefully using the term language sciences rather than Indian linguistics for looking into the contribution of India. In the Western tradition, the use of a technical term linguistics goes back to the beginning of the 19th century, when Ferdinand de Saussure, known as the father of modern linguistics, developed a structuralist school of thought and established linguistics as a major intellectual discipline. I am therefore wary of using the term Indian linguistics because it will guide our perspective from the study of language that came with Saussure. I would prefer to use the term grammatical tradition in my presentation today, for when viewed from the perspective of grammatical tradition, it not only tells us about the language, but also about the religion, about the philosophy, about the thought, the ideology and aesthetics. We have been very rich with these things as well. Indeed, the rapprochement between the two approaches, linguistics and grammatical tradition, is a necessary condition for understanding the fruitful cross-fertilization between these two modes of study. But it is important to understand that any such rapprochement must respect theoretical integrity of each other. And it is also equally important to avoid the temptation of trying to construct non-Western grammatical theory in the image of modern linguistics approaches, often in a violent or Procrustean fashion. Western versus non-Western tradition. When we talk about Western, Greek culture was linguistically self-centered and monoglot. Etymology, phonetics, particularly pronunciation, and grammar have been the three main aspects of language study that received much attention among the early Greeks. Although they recognized that languages change in the course of time, they treated etymology not as an inquiry into the history of a word, but as a search for the true meaning, which had been lost sight of over the years. Their interest in etymology generated a lot of enthusiasm, but I quote Robbins here, who says that there have been a little of value that was achieved in this enthusiasm. Quote closed. Several serious omissions of factual observations were observed. In the field of phonetics, the ancient Greek scholars made progress that was of great value, but they also suffered because of certain omissions of observations, particularly with reference to their classifications and descriptions in terms of impressionistic acoustics, without providing any adequate technical terminologies. This has been in sharp contrast to the ancient Indians and the Arabs, who were successful in providing the classification and description in terms of articulation. The Greek and the Romans, however, produced best work in the field of grammar. The commonplace philosophical speculation of Greek was a debate whether the language was governed by nature or convention, and the necessary connection between the meaning of a word and its form. Naturalists, those who believed in nature, maintained that all words actually signify things. This may not always be evident to a common man, because it is the philosopher's gaze that can discern the reality that lay behind the appearance of things. Their fierce debate over the dichotomies between nature, or what they call as physis, as against convention, or what they call as nomos or thesis, and regularity or analogous as against irregularity or anomalia, represented formalized debates leading to the linguistic controversy of antiquity, which had locked the adherents in a permanent argument. The non-Western traditions. The concern of the non-Western Indian scholars of language sciences was not with language, but with the composition of the physical world and how language is related to the universe. The relationship centered on the word and meaning. The physis nomos controversy in the Greek philosophy regarding how words acquire meaning further accentuated the non-Western scholars' concern with the nature of universe and exploring how the workings of nature are reflected in language. The debates on anomaly versus analogy emerged in response to this primary concern with nature of universe. The analogists believed that there are no laws of regularity to be discovered in nature. The anomalists were of the view that the regularities are not haphazard, but the consequence of inexorable laws. Ideas of analogy and anomaly developed rivalry between different philosophical schools in the Arab world, more specifically in the school of Basra. One school of thought adhered to the analogous view, which placed emphasis on the, I quote, strictly regularity and systematic nature of language as a means of logical discourse about the world of phenomena, quote closed. The other school of thought, represented by rival groups of the scholars in Kufa, subscribed to the anomalists' view, which laid stress on the diversity of language, including dialectical variations and textual occurrences as they were accepted. These ideas of analogy and anomaly were reflected in Arab grammatical scholarship quite independent of the Greek philosophy and Greek science. This is quite in contrast with the Latin grammarians, which is said to be modeled only on Greek philosophy. The Indian grammatical tradition, the most interesting non-Western grammatical tradition and the most original and independent, is that of India, which dates back at least 2.5 millennia and which culminates with the grammar of Panini in the 5th century BC, known as Ashtadhyaya. There are three major ways in which the Sanskrit tradition has had an impact on modern linguistic scholarship. First, as soon as Sanskrit became known to the Western learned world, the unraveling of comparative Indo-European grammar ensued, and the foundations were laid for the whole 19th century edifice of comparative philology and historical linguistics. In fact, historical and comparative linguistics saw the beginning of its existence only with this discovery by William Jones. But Sanskrit was simply a part of the data. Indian grammatical learning played almost no direct part. Secondly, the native tradition of phonetics in ancient India was recognized by the 19th century workers, which was considered vastly superior to Western knowledge. And this had important consequences for the growth of science of phonetics in the West. Thirdly, there is in the rules of definitions called sutras of Panini a remarkably subtle and penetrating account of Sanskrit grammar. The construction of sentences, compound nouns, and the like is explained through ordered rules operating on underlying structures in a manner strikingly similar in part to modes of modern theory, which is being carried out under the rubric of Chomskyan linguistics. In the Indian intellectual tradition, the origin of language study and its different branches are rooted in the source civilizational texts like Vedas and the Agamas. To maintain and interpret the vast oral Vedic verbal discourse, the Indian philosophers realized to have knowledge in different dimensions of language. Maintenance of texts in the oral tradition dependent on complete understanding of 1. Phonetics of speech, 2. The morphology of continuous utterances that in turn dependent on the third, that is understanding of meanings of utterances and words. Since oral transmission is a means to continue the tradition alive and make the knowledge accessible to others, phonetics and phonology are the first language science to have developed. Every Vedic text has a corresponding Pratishakya and text in order to recite the Vedic verses with the inputs of norm and variations and to keep the text intact. In theories of meaning, they were based on empirical foundation, which is quite in contrast to some Western theories. Sound empirical foundation has been possible because the components of Indian theories of meaning were familiar with the techniques and results of Paninian linguistics. In fact, they were predisposed with the holistic understanding of phenomena surrounding nature and language. In this context, it is equally important to note that Sanskrit terms for meaning are, in general, used only for words, sentences, and other elements of language. There are no expressions in Sanskrit corresponding to English expressions such as the meaning of existence or the meaning of life. These are expressions that have troubled the West not only in popular speculation but also in philosophy. It is only after the centuries of efforts and interpretation that theories of meaning arise. India is no exception here. Brahma, a class of prose works which started from the beginning of the first millennium BC, is considered as the earliest Indian efforts at interpretation. A typical Brahma's passages explain why a particular rite is performed and why a particular Vedic phrase or mantras is recited at that particular time. Nirukta gives more systematic etymological interpretations of a portion of the vocabulary of Rig Veda. It addresses the problems of ambiguous words, that is, those words that have two or more distinct meanings, by providing different etymologies for each of these meanings. Discussions of general nature on the parts of a speech and the meanings can also be seen in these early efforts towards interpretation and evolving theories of meaning. For example, verbs are said to express becoming and nouns are said to express being. Yaska's commentary on Nighantu lists Vedic words and provides a semantic feel of these words. For instance, it has grouped 23 words to cover the semantic field for night in the first section of Nighantu. Although the Indian grammatical tradition started as an ancillary science to the Vedas, it maintained its difference from other ancillary sciences by neither letting itself restricted to a particular school nor by providing separate grammar for each school, for each of the schools. On the contrary, it encompassed traits of all schools. It is this inclusive disposition that allowed language sciences to emerge as an independent science. It thus attained full freedom from the Vedas. Contrary to the other philosophical schools, grammarians believe that relationship exists between word and meaning is siddha, given. The term siddha means nitya, which refers to unchanging and immovable ideas or entities, which is the heaven is there, the earth is there. Patanjali has been the most explicit in this regard, for he believed that the source of empirical material is the ordinary speech. He believed that knowledge can be derived from the ordinary speech upon which the study of grammar is based. By using pot as a metaphor, Patanjali writes, and I quote Mahabhashya here, a man, this is a translation from J.F. Stall, a man who wants to use a pot goes to the house of a potter and says, make a pot, I want to use it. But a man who wants to use words does not go to the house of a grammarian and says, make words, I want to make use of them. When he wants to express a meaning, he uses the appropriate words. This perspective of ordinariness of language echoes in contemporary social theory, represented by French scholars like Bakhti, like Bourdieu, who talks about the speech of a common man. He uses a term like cadence, the charm, the vitality which is there in the common man's speech. Panini's grammar deals with both word meaning and sentence meaning. While the word meaning is fraught with many problems, and the Indian theories of meaning were aware of these problems, what occupied the center stage was the sentence meaning. What determines or establish sentencehood. The early grammarians considered a sentence as merely a collection of words or what possesses a finite verb. Akhanda was the name given to it. Khanda. Mimamsa school went beyond the simplistic notion of sentence. Instead, they evolved additional criteria called mutual syntactic expectance, akanksha, for determining full sentencehood. They argued that neither a collection of words, for example cow, horse, man, elephant, nor one that possesses a finite verb, for example cow irrigates man, elephant, is a sentence. However, he irrigates with water is a sentence because it fulfills this criteria of mutual syntactic expectancy between all the words. But can a full sentencehood of a sentence be determined only by fulfilling this criteria? What if we have a sentence such as he irrigates it with fire? Can it be called a sentence? Although it is syntactically well formed, semantically it is unacceptable. My colleagues from linguistics, it may echo them, the famous sentence of Chomsky when he says, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. He says that this sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, is an absolutely grammatically correct sentence. But is it acceptable? This was the debate that was raised in that period. The Indian theorists of meaning thus suggested another necessary criterion for determining the sentencehood, referred to as semantic compatibility or yogyata, which is absent in the sentence he irrigates it with fire, but present in a sentence he irrigates it with water. In a grammatical work prior to Patanjali, philosophical discussion revolving around the nature of word can be found in Samgraha, an ancient treatise. However, any rigorous attempt at expounding the philosophy of Sanskrit grammar can be seen only in the Vakyapadaya of Bhartihari. He has been mentioned in Atsing during his visit to India. He is said to be an ancient grammarian philosopher who represented Agama school. It discusses nature of word and sentence. Philosophy of Bhartihari is known as the philosophy of Shabd Brahmana, the word grammar. He neither affiliated with idealism nor materialism. This was the uniqueness of Bhartihari's philosophy. His assertion that a word is the source of the world is a novel proposition. This idea of worldly charged life of word finds its echo in Bakhtin when he says, and I quote Bakhtin here, all words have the taste